Our first speaker is Jennifer Fleck.
Thank you, trustees. My name is Jennifer Fleck. I'm a community member of this district. I object to the adoption of the SHAC bylaws. Article 2 responsibilities does not include the responsibility of the SHAC members to uphold the law as written in Section 28.004E in the Texas Education Code that states that the SHAC must review all course materials and instruction related to human sexuality, sexually transmitted diseases, or HIV or AIDS in order to advise the board of the adoption or rejection of the material and or instruction. Omission of this requirement from the existing bylaws resulted in AISD writing materials and instructions that are planned to be used in 2019-2020 that were never submitted to the SHAC for review. In addition, the AISD materials and instructions are in flagrant violation of other requirements in the Texas Education Code, Section 28.004E 1 through 5. Please vote no on these bylaws. Thank you.
Thank you. The next speaker is Carol Fedrick. Did I say that right? And then Allison Gephardt. And after Allison is Barbara Buckland.
Thank you, trustees. I'm Carol Fedrick. I'm a grandmother and taxpayer of this district, and I also object to the adoption of the SHAC bylaws. Article 2, responsibilities, does not include the responsibility of the SHAC members to uphold the law as written in 28.004E1 in the Education Code that states they must limit approved human sexuality education materials and instructions to only those that present abstinence from sexual activity as the preferred choice of behavior in relationships for unmarried persons of school age. Omissions of that requirement from the existing bylaws resulted in AISD writing materials and instructions that are planned to be used in 2019-2020 that violate those requirements. Rather than promote abstinence as the preferred choice of behavior, students are repeatedly instructed in various sexual activities and other high-risk behaviors. The change in SHAC bylaws is another example of this district rushing into unnecessary change. Please slow down. Do not adopt these bylaws. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good evening, board members and Dr. Cruz. My name is Allison Gephardt. I'm a community member and I object to the adoption of the SHAC bylaws. Article 2 does not include the responsibility of the SHAC members to uphold the law as written in 28.004E2 in the Education Code that states that they must limit approved human sexuality education materials and instruction to only those that devote more attention to abstinence from sexual activity than to any other behavior. Omission of that requirement from the existing bylaws resulted in AISD writing materials and instructions to be used in 2019-2020 that violate those requirements and, in fact, devote the vast majority of materials and instructions to exposing children to sexual activities, including the big decisions, classroom discussion activities for sixth graders on whether anal and oral sex should be considered abstinence. Definitions are included to make sure 11-year-olds know what those activities are. Please vote no on these bylaws. Thank you.
The next speaker is Barbara Buckland, and then afterwards is Stephen Alexander.
Good evening. My name is Barbara Buckland, and I'm a parent and grandparent and also a pastor in the area. I object to the adoption of the SHAC bylaws. Article 2 does not include the responsibility of the SHAC members to uphold 28.004E3 in the Education Code that states that approved human sexual education materials and instruction is limited to those that emphasize abstinence from sexual activity. This is the only method that is 100% effective in preventing pregnancy, STDs, HIV or AIDS, and the emotional trauma associated with adolescent sexual activity. Omission of that requirement from the existing bylaws resulted in materials and instructions to be used in 2019 and 2020 that violate those requirements. While mention may be made once that abstinence is the only method that is 100% effective, all the rest of the curriculum consistently talks about consent and condoms. Please vote no to these bylaws.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Stephen Alexander, and then Bach, and it's L-E on here. I don't know if that's misspelled or you answer.
Good evening, ISD. My name's Stephen Alexander. I'm a concerned uncle and have 3 beautiful nieces. I'm here this evening to object to the adoption of the SHAC bylaws. Specifically, Article 2 does not include the responsibility of SHAC members to uphold 28.004E Section 5 in the Education Code that states they must limit approved human sexuality education materials and instruction to only those that teach contraception and condom use in terms of human use reality rates instead of theoretical laboratory rates, if instruction on contraception and condoms is included in the curriculum content at all. Omission of that requirement from the existing bylaws resulted in AISD writing curriculum to be used in 2019 and 2020 that violates those requirements. Teaching students that, quote, condoms are a good way to prevent STI along with dental dams, or that, quote, condoms are the best way to prevent STIs if someone's sexually active, fails 28.004E Section 5, and worse, it fails our children. I remind all of you that you are responsible and will be held accountable for your decisions. I encourage you to vote no on these bylaws.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Next speaker is. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Sure. If you hold on just 1 second, I think I have a point of order from Trustee Singh.
Yeah, I just wanted some clarification, either from the board president or from our council. Do we typically, does the SHAC bylaws typically need to include Texas Education Code? You know, like what all the Texas Education Code that we are going to be addressing? Is that a typical thing?
So can that's a great clarification question.
Yeah.
Can I ask that we go through all the testimony and then have an opportunity for our council to answer your clarification?
And the reason I
question?
asked is because I was just wondering if it was on topic to the agenda.
What you're asking is whether or not the testimony is germane to the topic, which is a legitimate question. And Todd, I'm looking at if you can answer the question whether the public testimony has been
that was the
germane
concern.
to the action item.
So far, the testimony does appear germane to the item because you are approving bylaws. They've spoken to the bylaws in terms of what they must require, and I'll speak to my opinions on that after the comments are finished.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank y'all. Ms. Lee? Am I pronouncing that correctly?
Yeah.
Okay.
Hi, I'm Bach, a member of the community, and I object to the adoption of the SHAC's bylaw. The bylaws are in violation of 28004A that requires the board to establish a SHAC to assist the district in ensuring that local community values are reflected in the district health education instruction. However, Article 2 states that it is the responsibility of the SHAC to advise and consult with the district in the development of a comprehensive health education curriculum. Part of the comprehensive health ed is comprehensive sex ed. AISD explicit graphic brand of comprehensive inclusive sex ed is not reflected of the majority of the community values in the district. Omission of that requirement from the existing bylaws resulted in ISD writing instruction to be used in 2019 and 2020 that are highly offensive to many parents in the district, including instruction in sexual orientation, gender identity questioning, and the constant flooding of gender neutrality beginning in 3rd grade that causes confusion in children and encourages unhealthy behaviors. Please vote no on this bylaw. Thank you.
Thank you. Next speaker is Gary Moore. Next speaker is Gary Moore, and then Doug Harrington. Mr. Moore?
Yes, thank you. My name's Gary Moore. I'm here as a taxpayer and concerned. I'm against the adoption of any amendments to the bylaws. I think currently we have a lot of issues already before Shack that needs to be addressed. They need to get through their programs that they got, especially with the sex education program, before we start amending bylaws to facilitate that. We need to operate under what they've got to work with now. Currently, it appears that they are using Alberta Health Services, which is an abortion provider. So they're doing things that are not quite legitimate and legal. So I think we've got other questions before us today. And one of them's not really making adopting this. So I appreciate you, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Doug Harrington. And then after Mr. Harrington is Mary Elizabeth Castle.
Thank you for giving us an opportunity to speak. My name is Doug Harrington, and I'm a community member. I also object to the adoption of the SHAP bylaws. The bylaws are in direct violation of 28.004A that requires the board to establish a SHAC to assist in the district, ensuring a local community values are reflected in the district's health education and instruction. Nothing in them has the responsibility on the part of the board or superintendent to ensure that they adopt members to the SHAC that are diverse in any area, especially those that are diverse in thought and values. For example, there's no representation for the heavily conservative Hispanic population in ISD, which is 58% of the student population in 2017. While the ISD claims diversity, the SHAC has only represented the progressive and values and agendas of the administration. The information provided, their consideration only supported AISD's unscientific and unproven
Thank you.
progressive ideologies.
Thank you,
Thank
Mr.
you for
Harrington.
your time.
Appreciate it. The next speaker is Mary Elizabeth Castle. And then after Mary Elizabeth is June, I want to say Kreiner. And then Joseph Martinez after that.
Good evening, trustees. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. I'm Mary Elizabeth Castle, the Policy Advisor for Texas Values, and I'm here to discuss 17.1 on the agenda. Now, there have been some problems with the SHAC, and there's a historical problem that the SHAC does not represent the viewpoints of Austin ISD parents and of the Austin community. An overwhelming majority of parents last month testified in disagreement with what the SHAC is doing in regards to sex education. So the trustees should not allow members to serve multiple terms as SHAC members, as this will only add to the poor representation of viewpoints and an unbalanced SHAC. Also, officers need to serve shorter terms on the SHAC than 2 years, because that means that as they're a member on the board, they're president for the entire 2 years, and that promotes a monopoly of viewpoints. And lastly, the code of conduct needs to be stricter to protect all people who testify, and make sure that all people are protected when they present their ideas to the board. Please take time to read my handout if you can to see other points. Thank you.
Thank you. June Kreiner and then Joseph Martinez.
Board members and Dr. Cruz, I'm a parent and a grandparent and a community member in this district. I object to the adoption of the SHAC bylaws. These bylaws do not adequately support the law as written in 28.004 of the Texas Education Code. Even worse, various parts of the bylaws conflict with the law. These bylaws do not adequately prepare SHAC members for the responsibilities they will have on this critically important committee. They do not adequately inform and in some cases misinform parents of the responsibilities of SHAC members. They do not explain the limits of the board and administration over the SHAC, which has resulted in an administration has run roughshod over our SHAC and violated Texas laws and district policies in the process. Under these bylaws, they will only continue. You have a chance to formulate bylaws that will create a SHAC that will seriously consider and investigate parental and community concerns. Please vote no on these bylaws.
Thank you. Mr. Joseph Martinez.
Buenas tardes.
Buenas tardes.
My name is Joseph Martinez. I'm a parent, preacher, and a community member here in this area. And I have a few questions on Shack and concerns as well. And one of my first questions is, why don't they have diversity of thought? And how will the large Hispanic community in the district be assured that our values will be represented, since they have not been in the past? What can we do as a Hispanic community to get sex ed material that is objectionable to us individually and to our culture removed from the curriculum? Many Hispanics do not have technology or know how to use it to get notified of surveys, or they can review materials. That puts us in a big disadvantage. So we ask that you vote no for the bylaws of the Shack. Thank you.
Thank you. So this concludes public testimony. Trustees, are there any questions or clarifications that you'd like to make? I think there was a question to Todd. Do you want to ask the question? Todd, you want to come up and answer? Trustee saying you had a question for him? Or?
Well, I think maybe you had already answered it. I was really just seeing if the testimonies that we had been hearing were germane, and it seems like you thought they were.
So, Vice President Anderson.
So maybe the question I'll ask is, could you please explain what legally needs to be included in bylaws versus what doesn't have to be stated in bylaws specifically, but obviously may still be in code or law?
Certainly. I did review the bylaws that were part of the board docs back up for this agenda item, and they read very much like bylaws of advisory committees often do. A lot of the comments, the public testimony, is to help you understand the community's view on certain issues and certain things contained in statute and the community's perspective on that. But to the bylaws themselves, it is not a requirement, and it would be unwieldy if they began to recite every potential statutory provision that relates to the work of the advisory committee. So the bylaws read as they should for a committee of that nature. They will give their recommendations to you, and I would suspect many members of that committee are very familiar with many of the provisions of the law, if not all of them, that have been recited tonight. I know the trustees would consult with me or the District General Counsel, Elise Jansen, if they had questions regarding compliance with state law, and that's the obligation coming out of any recommendations of the Shack and the board's work in that regard.
Thank you. Trustee Wagner.
I'd just like to comment for the record that I hear a lot of conversation about our Shack's focus on sex ed. And while that has been a component of work that the Shack is engaged in, it is a small component of the work that the Shack endeavors to complete on behalf of our student communities. And I think it's important to note that there is a lot of work that is happening that extends well beyond sex ed in this group, and I don't want that to get lost because the focus has been so finely honed on that one particular aspect. I want to honor the work that's being done by the community around mental health, around physical health of our students, things like recess time, nutrition, things that are incredibly important for the well-being of our students overall, and honor the work that's being done by that committee for those purposes as well, beyond just sex ed.
Thank you. Trustees, any other questions? If not, this again concludes the public testimony part. We now move to the consent agenda. Are there any consent items the trustees would like to pull for a separate vote? But Vice President Anderson.
Item 14.5 needs to be pulled for a separate vote because of a conflict for President Rodriguez.
Second. Sorry.
Second from Trustee Ellens. Any other consent items, Trustee Ellens?
I'd like to pull item 12.1.
Second.
Okay, any other items, trustees? So Trustee Cindy Anderson has pulled item 14.5 with a second by Trustee Ellens. Trustee Ellens has pulled item 12.1 with a second by Trustee Cindy Anderson. Secretary Ellens, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda? Oh, I'm sorry. Trustee Wagner.
I'm not sure if I need to pull this for separate vote, but I do have an additional appointment on 17.1 that's not on the slate in the record, so I don't know if I need to do that for separate vote or if I can add that as a amendment to the consent agenda
Todd?
to be corrected in the record.
You could certainly entertain an amendment to the motion to correct any clerical error in the membership that was on the attached backup for that item.
So she should make a motion now to amend the consent agenda
To
to add the particular, okay. So
Does there need to be a motion and a second for the consent agenda before I do so, though?
it's an amendment to the consent agenda.
There needs to be a
But we
vote on
haven't
your
made a motion.
amendment if it's seconded to include the appointee that didn't make it into the backup.
So I should make
Yeah.
my amendment?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, so I amend, ask to amend item 17.1 to include the appointee for District 7 of Elisa Miller,
Can you spell that, please?
Alisa Miller.
Okay, is there a second?
Second.
Okay. So Trustee Wagner has made a motion to amend the consent agenda, item 17.1 for SHAC membership of District 7 for Elisa
Miller.
with a second from Secretary Ellens. All those in favor of the motion, please raise your right hand. The motion passes unanimously and is now part of the consent agenda. So Secretary Ellens, do I have a motion to approve the consent agenda?
I think so. Someone double check me. I make a motion to approve consent agenda items 13.1 through 14.4 and 15.1 through 17.2.
Second.
So having a motion by Secretary Ellens and a second by Trustee Teish to approve consent agenda items 13.1 through 14.4 and 15.1 through 17.2. All those in favor, please raise your right hand. The motion passes by all those on the dais.